The results, as we've grown into adulthood, have been tragic and permanent. I could explain how my sister and brothers were changed, but this is my testimony, so I won't. Dad, instead of suicide, turned to God. He had been a Christian from his boyhood and found what he needed through his faith. God would do in Dad and Mom's lives what they couldn't, and Dad was led into a new career selling insurance. By diligent hard work, within 2 years, he was the state's #1 agent. He won a trip to San Francisco. While on this trip with my mom, they came through Portland, and they decided where their next move would be. Sometime later, somewhere else, someday things would be better. After I graduated and I was attending my first college in Grand Forks, North Dakota, the family moved here to Oregon. I mentioned my first college because over the next 5 years, I'd enrolled and attend University of North Dakota, PCC, University of Oregon, back to PC, and finally PSU, where I'd carry a briefcase, back then it wasn't backpacks, it was briefcases, that held my bottle of Jack Daniels. I was so drunk on the day of one final, I couldn't find the room I was being given in. I'd never earn a degree at all. I'd laugh it off and say, hey, I'd crammed 3 years of college into 5. After I flunked out of my first year at UND, I arrived here in Portland in 1967 and lived with my family in a little house between Lake Oswego and Tiger. That was to be the final family home. Dad continued to sell insurance here, but then went back to construction, remodeling mostly, and I was able to work alongside him for the many years as he taught me carpentry, plus a lot more. Bar none, this was the best job I ever had. My mom worked in a hospital, a newborn nursery. She had become head nurse there and worked up until she had a stroke and died in 1986. She actually took care of my firstborn son in her newborn nursery, and then she passed away to the Lord 3 months later. Dad died in 1993, mostly of a broken heart, but forever faithful to his wife. My mom and dad always provided, protected, and cared for their family. They both walked with the Lord, and they taught us their faith. I never would hear my mom curse or see either of them drunk or abusive. I've been raised in a Presbyterian church in Bismarck. I'd attend youth group up until junior, maybe senior year. I'd gone through a communicants class, professed my belief and faith in Jesus Christ, and received my Bible, which I still have. Back in 1959, I was 11. I can't remember a time when I hadn't thought of Jesus as God, known what he'd done and why. I've always been a believer. I didn't just accept what I was taught, I was convinced in my heart. But my belief and faith wouldn't stop me from rebelling against my mom, my dad, and God. I followed my sin nature, doing what I wanted and relying on myself. I was full of myself, but inside I was miserable. Really, never content, but not willing to take responsibility for the choices I was making or the consequences. I was like a slave serving sin up until March 1983. Even though I'd grown up in this truly great home with moral, loving parents who always celebrated our birthdays, Thanksgiving with home-baked pies, Christmas with tree decorations, presents, it wasn't enough for me. Something called to me, and I was not willing to be obedient. I was always looking for excitement, girls, getting high. I was really good at reading other people. I used my intelligence and personality to suit myself, to get my way, or to get away with my bad behavior. I learned how to use people's trust in me, their liking or loving of me, to achieve my own desires. I became a master manipulator, first-class liar, and starting slowly, moved steadily towards becoming a full-blown drunk and drug addict with an out-of-control lifestyle to match. I began drinking New Year's Eve 1964. I was 15 and a sophomore. I'd filled a large Listerine bottle with 5 or 6 different hard liquors that my dad had bought for a party that they were having. And I never saw this kind of party at my parents' home before that or after it. He was entertaining new contacts he'd made selling insurance and smoozing them. My buddy Craig got his dad's 58 Chevy Bel Air and picked me up. I started drinking this concoction. Craig tasted it a few times, but he was always more cautious, and he wasn't an alcoholic, as it turned out. I didn't know it that night or actually for many years, but I was alcoholic from day one. I proceeded to finish the bottle over the next couple of hours and became falling down, puking drunk. With most drinkers, this experience would discourage similar future episodes, but for me it just framed, which would be hundreds of this kind of night, then days too. I was always drawn back to repeat this oblivion, demoralization, this reenactment of self-will run riot and self-destruction. Back in junior high, I'd found this girlfriend. Before long, I had my first intimate relationship. She and I would continue our intimacy through high school and then into my first year at UND. I would cheat on her many times, yet demand her loyalty. I used her for sex and to build my ego. This set in place my typical attitude and treatment of women up until my marriage in 1984. I wasn't as prolific as Magic Johnson, but I thought I was. In fact, dozens of gals were used and abused by me. To be honest, quite a few used and abused me too, and they're the ones I remember best. I think we tend to remember painful experiences better. I did. Many terrific moral women who were initially attracted to me once they discovered who I was would stop any further association immediately. This would cause me great remorse and cause me to harden my heart even more, becoming more defensive and resentful. I became super critical of others to make myself feel better, and I'd continue on with my out-of-control behavior and attitudes, which placed me against the world. Many decent men I came into contact with would reject me outright, or if not, I'd find them too boring. Actually, they were only a revealing mirror showing me how screwed up I'd become, so I just couldn't be around them. Towards the end of my actively drinking and using drugs, by the way, I'd started with pot, then hash, then LSD and other psychedelics, then cocaine, but always pot and always booze. I'd started dating a friend of a girlfriend who had dumped me, and I ended up sharing an apartment with her in Tualatin. She entered into my mind-numbing lifestyle, and this became my last stand. I was so sick. I isolated with her, stayed drunk or stoned through the beginning of 1983. I didn't even show up for my family's Christmas celebration, of which I'd always been involved with. My mom and sister brought presents to me at my apartments on Christmas Day, but I wouldn't answer the door. So they took the screen off the kitchen window and put the presents in on my counter. All the barriers which had held me in check for so many years were at times gone. Cars would be wrecked, as well as relationships with those closest to me. I'd find myself ending up in places which made no sense with people who were as messed up and as dangerous as I was. A few times stumbling around somewhere in Portland, I'd look down and find that I'd wet my pants. I'd been carrying a knife in my pocket for years, then a loaded .357 under my car seat right next to my bottle of Jack Daniels. I was at any given point ready to literally blow up or take somebody out with me, but God had mercy. My cars typically didn't have insurance on them, and I'd rotate them so the police wouldn't recognize me as easily. Once I was traveling to a girlfriend's on I-205 in a yellow 400-plus horsepower Torino GT, perfect car for me. I went under an overpass. I was doing about 80, right under a sheriff with his radar on. He proceeded after me, pulled me over. I was high, but not enough to run that time. My Torino's plates had expired, so I'd switched them with the plates from a 72 Galaxy that I had. Both being Fords, this seemed to confuse him for a while. Of course, he checks to find out my license is suspended. I had no idea. And that I had no insurance on the car, but he still didn't know which car was which. Befuddled, this officer wrote me a speeding ticket and one requiring proof of license and insurance by the time I got to court. Boy, was I glad he didn't look under my seat. Years of sobriety later, I've actually met drivers who have never gotten a ticket. And it's like we lived in different universes. From the beginning, I was a drunk on the move. I had to keep moving, so my drinking and drug use was often behind the wheel. I thank the Lord that I never killed anybody or was killed or maimed myself.